Hey, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the AWS Pulse. Did you miss us? We missed you. I'm here, John Walker, Principal SA at AWS. I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Rafael Caixeta, Solution Architect with AWS as well. And today we have a very special guest, Anthony McClure, and we're going to be diving in deep on SaaS, everything you ever wanted to know about SaaS and were too afraid to ask. So, Anthony, I just want to pop it over to you, man. With the journey you've had at AWS, the first question we love to ask our guests:
Sure.
you've spent years helping organizations build on AWS. You've spent years helping people build SaaS specifically on AWS. What drew you to this space, and
Yeah.
how did you get here? What's it mean to be a SaaS architect on AWS today?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Great intro. Thank you so much, Sean. So first of all, just taking a big step back, I've been in IT for, gosh, it'll be 30 years next year, if you can believe that. But, a lot of my career, I would say the entire second half of my career was really focused in on being a s- an engineer, an architect, but specifically around SaaS. So I had the opportunity to be part of a startup as a co-founder, kind of a spin-off from another company. And that company and that solution that we created was a born in the cloud SaaS solution. So, SaaS is really kind of in my blood from that point. And this is going back, gosh, almost 20 years now at this point. So it was very, very early days of software as a service. And thinking back to those times and trying to build out this quote unquote multi-tenant solution and this SaaS thing, which was very new back then, we kind of had to do it all by hand, right? We had to figure everything out. We had to understand, what that actually meant. How do you do tenant isolation? How do you create this multi-tenant thing? And I feel like that we were, of course, very successful with that, right? The company did very well. Ultimately, it was sold and bought out by another company, and that kind of gave me my opportunity to join AWS going back 5 years ago now. So I just have SaaS in my blood, right? It's kind of where it comes from, but at the same time, I have a lot of scars. There's a lot of battles that I had to fight, and lessons that I learned along the way. And so when I was joining AWS, I had this opportunity to be a part of a team called the SaaS Factory. The SaaS Factory, when I first joined it, had been around for a little bit, so I wasn't new to the SaaS Factory. But I got the opportunity to take those experiences that I had learned personally in my own career and to help other AWS partners and customers to build SaaS solutions on AWS. So we're really very service focused, like a lot of teams at AWS are, or even particular partner or customer focused, like account teams typically are. We really were able to go in from a consultative perspective and talk to our customers about why they want to build a SaaS solution and what those SaaS solutions would look like from a best practices perspective on AWS. So that's kind of what brought me, to this point in here today. Now, I will say that the SaaS factory itself actually is no longer a team at AWS, right? So we've kind of moved around and split off and gone our own different ways within the organization, but the SaaS technical field community stays with us to this day, and we are continuing that legacy as we move forward of building out best practices and helping our customers to build SaaS.
Yeah, I'm part of that SaaS TFC as well.
Okay.
I've really enjoyed being a piece of it, and this whole idea of being able to work in as a TFC, technical field community. Just want to explain that to the
Right.
listeners if this is the first time you're hearing it. A technical field community at AWS is like you have to be an architect, and so you have to know a little bit about a lot of things. But being T-shaped, like is what we call it, you have to know a lot about one subject matter. And
Right.
so going in deep on that subject matter, we have this technical field community. So the folks who are in the field working with customers have one technical area that they dive in really, really deep on, where they can go 400, 500 level is what we call it in that specific topic area. And so working inside of SaaS, that's what you're talking about, right? So everyone, we still have that
Right.
SaaS competency. We still have, kind of the heart that beats for SaaS customers, and trying to make sure we get multi-tenancy and isolation questions, as well as the answers to the questions of what is SaaS. So, Rafael,
Which is a
I think
big loaded question.
yeah, I think I'll pass it over to you for this one.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you both are on the SaaS, but by the depths that it exists on the AWS. I'm not, so I'll represent the audience here. You guys can send me the questions you want me to ask John and Anthony, and I will make sure they answer them. I'm not a SaaS expert, so I'm learning as we go here. I think that even though we might not have the SaaS factory anymore, I know AWS has a very opinionated view of how like SaaS is, and especially how it's implemented in the cloud, which I think helps, right? Because we try to pass on that knowledge to our customers and everybody that wants to use AWS. And there's a thing on the AWS SaaS architecture fundamentals that calls SaaS a business model and not an architecture strategy. And then the common thing I keep dealing with SaaS, and people usually sees that as an infrastructure thing, and it feels like AWS messaging is pointing towards that is not actually true. And so, is that the case, Anthony? And what should we think about it? Like, how should we think about it instead? I guess I'll start with that question.
This is a fantastic question, and this is a highly, highly important question to anybody that is wanting to build SaaS on AWS or just build SaaS in general. First and foremost, SaaS as an architecture. There's architecture that exists, of course, in order to build any solution that we're going to be creating, the technology behind it to actually make these things run. That's a given. But at a fundamental level, software as a service is not about the underlying technology, the architecture that you're building on top of. As mentioned by you, Raphael, the SaaS or SaaS itself, if we're going to describe it, is a business model and a software delivery model at its heart. Now, why is that distinction important? Well, this concept, and we often have these customers that will come to us, and the first thing that they're going to say is, hey, I want to build a SaaS, or we're building a SaaS, and I need to make all these architectural decisions and get into this. We have to put the brakes on a little bit, or we should be putting the brakes on a little bit and taking a step back and asking them why. Why are you wanting to build this as a SaaS solution? There's obviously going to be some reasons behind that, and it's going to differ whether they're, say, a greenfield or a startup, than if it's a brownfield or an existing product that's going to, that they're trying to migrate into a SaaS. But those questions of asking why they're wanting to do this really starts to uncover underneath it the pain points that they've been having, let's say, with traditional software pricing and packaging or delivery, right? And we can get into more of this as we go along. But absolutely, SaaS is a business model first and foremost. We also hear a lot, I think, these days, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, with generative AI, with agentic AI, that SaaS is dead, right? I think maybe we've probably all heard that term kind of being bandied about. And I just chuckle to myself because, again, SaaS is not about the technology. The technology is going to change over time. That is a given. What doesn't change, though, are those fundamental business processes and business thinking, the delivery model behind these solutions is going to be the same, and it's going to still be there, whether it's agentic, whether it's Gen AI, or whether it's traditional software development. So we want to be really careful when we're first talking to customers, or even if you're a customer right now and you're thinking about building SaaS, to take that step back and really to dig in and understand why it is that you're going down this path and what's the right way to answer those business questions, because those business questions are going to inform the architectural decisions that you're going to need to make in order to build a successful SaaS solution. And most importantly, to be able to run the thing, right? It's not good enough to just build out this amazing architecture, this perfectly built technological monster, so to speak, if at the end of the day, you can't actually operate it and make money and ROI from it. So yeah, absolutely is a business proposition first and foremost.
Yeah, Anthony, on that one, and Raphael, I want to go into it a little bit too. I've got kind of a soapbox to stand on about SaaS. And so people come at it as if, it's software as a service. And I like to emphasize that last word. The service is really about that service and that experience that you get as a customer of your business. So you're providing a service. Like, what service are you providing? So if you're going to talk about a restaurant, the service is you get a table and you get, served, and you get your, water or your soda or your wine in a certain amount of time, and you feel like you've been served. You've got, a service that's being provided to you. Otherwise, everyone would just cook the chicken at home, right? That service is being paid for and it's worth something. So whenever you're receiving software as a service as opposed to making it your own, those are two very different kinds of ways of consuming software. And it is going to remain the same. And if you look at, some of the largest generative AI providers, I would argue that they are SaaS, right? They're providing a service to their customers. And those things actually have to be provided with the same concept, the same, sort of parameters. How do you make sure that you're going to preserve the customer data? That was one of the very first questions as we got into this generative AI era that we're in right now. And so I've seen this progress through the last 3.5, 4 years. And just every one of those SaaS questions that Anthony and I were taught to answer with our fellow, SaaS specialists in SaaS community, it's all been questions that have come up during this generative AI rollout and how to actually solve these and solve them at scale. And it's difficult.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult with your software, whether you're, providing fintech software or you're, providing something that's going to, guess how old the person in the picture is, software. But that service is still the service. You got to think about the thing the person's receiving and how they're going to benefit from that thing.
I want to ask you something, John.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you too, Anthony. A question we got on the comments. You mentioned, right, Anthony, that people saying that maybe SaaS will go away, and then someone on the comments said that they heard the opposite in France. They're saying the future will be only SaaS. So, what's your take on that?
Well, the concept of individually deployed software, packaged software, let's say, right, packaged and installed software. I think there's still going to be a place for it in the future, but it's going to be very different than what it looks like today, right? And so at its core, that individualized packaged software would still exist or could still exist down at the individual level, because there's always going to be a core component of people that are either untrustworthy of what's going on, right? This whole thing of the cloud, maybe in the long run it will change, but people are always going to want to have things locally. Let's put it that way. But what that looks like could be very different. And there's still probably going to be a SaaS component of that sits behind it. So the software that's delivered today will become much more customized, almost even designed by the individual user, for instance, right? But it would still be something that's local. So behind that, though, as a SaaS, yeah, I think it would still be there, or you could classify it as a SaaS solution, because there's going to be some kind of control plane or control mechanism behind it to do it. But I don't know, John, what do you think?
No, I second that. And so if I'm getting into what those features are that are kind of leading edge, bleeding edge, those things are running at scale on servers you don't get to fit on a phone, right? But you want to be able to use them from your phone. And so in that sense, there's so much software that actually needs to be there. It needs to be in the cloud and consuming those services there and providing you the service you receive on the device itself. And so I see a lot of these things that are intermittently connected are still going to have that packaged software that's delivered to the end. And there's lots of software that may need to be not software as a service. So if you are getting, let's say, an X-ray, right? While you're getting that X-ray, the software that's packaged on the X-ray machine, maybe there's not a reason to have that be a SaaS, but packaging up those images and sending them to the cloud for processing, there's a differential there. So more and more of those components of the service end up having an argument for SaaS tiering or SaaS feature set, while there's still a need for those hardened things that are in a healthcare setting, some of those things that are in aerospace on planes. You want the real-time software, like how fast does a helicopter blade need to actually tilt in order to keep the helicopter in the air. You don't want those necessarily connecting to the cloud because there's no need to. You can process that on device. So a lot of software is going to have a SaaS component and is going to add value to everyone who's using it. And some of those things they make sense in a hospital setting, in aerospace setting. Maybe it's something that's on orbit and needs to process right there. Those sorts of things I see. Yeah, keep them where they make sense.
Yeah, please don't make real-time sensitive stuff a SaaS on the cloud.
Helicopter blades, keep it on the helicopter, man. Yeah, for sure.
Please, yeah. Especially if I'm on the helicopter as well, you know.
And even if we're talking about artificial intelligence, right? Models, for instance, people are beginning to discover more and more that you can run these models locally, or at least some models locally, right? I mean, of course, it's going to depend a lot on the hardware that you have and how fast it's going to actually be and what models that you can use. But the growing availability of open source models and their ability to run them locally is kind of driving a bit of a niche market right now. But we're going to see that go down scale and down market quite a bit. AI models that run on embedded devices, for instance, right? There's going to be a place for all of that. And if it's a licensed model, how do you license that? Well, there's probably going to be a SaaS solution or some sort of SaaS control plane that's monitoring or looking at that. So there's definitely going to be a place for SaaS and a place for deployed software in the future, depending on the ability.
So
let's keep the Mac Mini's availabilities healthy, guys.
Yeah, it's so hard to get one. Yeah.
So I want to get into some of our vocabulary. You just said, SaaS control plane. But we also have these concepts when we talk about deployment models, and we want to separate those out from tenancy, right? So we've got this concept of having something run in a silo, or something running in a pool, or something running in a hybrid of a, some parts of it are running in the silo and some parts of it are running in pool mode. So whenever we're talking about that, often I get into these conversations with customers and they're thinking about multi-tenancy, and it's all or nothing, man. Like they want to put everything into multi-tenancy, or they think that if they're siloed and every customer, every tenant has their own deployment, then there's no way they can be SaaS. So walk us through boiling down that other misconception.
Yeah, absolutely. One other part of this too is just this whole concept of vocabulary starts to become really important when you're inside of an organization and trying to talk amongst yourselves, whether it's an engineering level or at a business level, about what these things actually mean. So we've said multi-tenancy, we've seen single tenancy, and they'll say maybe we'll have a package solution or
okay. Let's pause on tenant. Let's just go tenant.
Sure.
So talk about tenancy in terms of like an apartment, right? So walk them through what's a tenant. Yeah.
Right. So taking a step back here, what is tenant? Good point. So a tenant is, let's say, an individual customer or organization of the SaaS solution, right? So if you can think of it like this, the analogy that John came up with there, an apartment building. An apartment building has individual blocks where many different people can live and work together, right? Live together at least. But each one of those areas is kind of unique to itself, and it can operate within its apartment that it's renting out of that apartment building. Now, there are shared services that go along with that apartment building, right? Power comes into the building, water comes into the building. Those tenants, of course, are all utilizing and taking advantage of those. Now, it's not free, right? They have to pay for it. So there's some monitoring that's going on, but everybody's kind of using those shared services. In those cases, or what we would refer to this, if we're taking that analogy and applying it to SaaS, we would say those are pooled services. At least that's the terminology that we use at AWS to represent that. If we were to put that in an infrastructure perspective, this would be shared infrastructure. Could be a shared database across multiple tenants, multiple customers, right? Or shared compute, where you have multiple tenants, say, using the same EC2 server or the same Kubernetes cluster, right?
So in an apartment, if you've got a pool, they're all using the pool together, right? So that's a
maybe,
pooled tenant.
Right?
Yeah, that's a pooled service for all the tenants, right?
Exactly. Now, you would hope, at least, and I guess this depends on how the apartment building is set up, but the individual apartments, though, those are dedicated to each person, in this case, that lives in those apartments. And this would be equivalent to what we like to call silo tenancy or siloed model.
Yeah.
So in that case, that apartment itself that they live within, it's unique to that particular tenant. Nobody else gets access to that unless that tenant allows them to, or hopefully they don't break in, but right, it's isolated to that particular tenant. And again, if we apply this to infrastructure, this would be equivalent to deploying a database out specifically for an individual customer of yours. Now, one thing that John mentioned earlier is that as we're coming into this kind of thought of, well, we're all in one way or another, right? We're building this multi-tenant thing, and sometimes you start to confuse this multi-tenant system that you're building, again, back down to the infrastructure, where maybe we have to build all of this isolated or siloed stuff to every individual tenant, or we need to go the opposite direction. We need to create a pooled set of services that every single tenant uses. Now, both of those two options are options that are valid under specific circumstances,
Build a
but they're not
pool for
valid to
build a
everybody.
swimming pool for every tenant in your
In
apartment. That
every
might be
apartment. That's
expensive,
right.
right?
Sure,
Or so,
absolutely.
but getting into it like the hybrid thing. So what's a hybrid look like? Yeah.
Yeah, so hybrid, and let's be honest, this is really where most people ultimately end up.
Yeah.
Where you have some services, some resources that are siloed and individualized to a tenant or tenants, and then some services or resources that are pooled for your tenants. An
Okay.
example of this, if you're looking at a service, right? Let's say you have a product service that the compute, let's say, that you're using for that service is a pooled resource where everybody's kind of hitting the same web server, right? But the data that's feeding those products that show up for that particular tenant is coming from their own individualized database, so a siloed database. In that case, now we have this hybrid, or sometimes called a bridge as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So having that nomenclature is important when you're talking about these things inside of your own organization, because you want to be really clear with how you're describing things. So if you're talking about, well, we're going to make a multi-tenant compute and multi-tenant database, well, what does that mean? Multi-tenant in what way? Are we creating a siloed version of that? Are we creating a pooled version of that? So having that extra level of agreed to vocabulary can go a really long way to avoid confusion for an organization building SaaS.
Right. So if you're building an apartment building, one tenant per apartment, all the tenants can use the pool, and then you're going to have to share when it comes to the laundry machines, right? So same thing goes in software, and you can draw those analogies whenever you're laying out what those resources are.
Yeah.
And I find that that's a really good like mental model. Like, oh yeah, I've lived in an apartment before. I can think through this.
Mhm.
And so it's very much the same with all those individual resources. You want one to be just special for that one tenant? Do you want it to be something everybody gets to share alike, or do you want it to be, you know, something somewhere in the middle where everyone's got to take turns with it, or it's something that's going to be able to bridge the gap between, you know, they can get to their apartment to the pool like with a shared resource like the walkways and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
And these kinds of analogies also help a lot to help the business to really understand the architecture as well. So, you know, because some of these concepts get pretty in the weeds the deeper you get.
Yeah, talk about
Can we make
DynamoDB
washing and
prefixes,
dryers,
right? Yeah.
Right.
Washing and dryers, please make them silos. You know,
yeah, well, you've got to
really
work
hard.
on isolation then. So that's another term, like
Right.
isolation.
That's
so you want
another level. That's right.
one at a time. So you've got different things you can use for a tenant at a particular time. And so isolation level on your apartment, that's lock and key. So some things you're going to have really locked down. A special server for a special customer, special DB for a special customer, single tenant,
Right.
real tight isolation. But some of those are sometimes like you can use this, you know, container sometimes if no one else is using it. And so we see that often in the architecture. So those isolation levels are different depending on the usage.
Yeah, or based on your pricing and packaging model, right? I think there's kind of an interesting take on this too, going back to the apartment reality, let's say, versus a home reality or renting a home. With different tiers of customers when you're building out your pricing and packaging, you may have a silver tier, a gold tier, right? We've probably all seen these from different service offerings. Well, your platinum tier customers, if we're thinking of housing, may get the maybe they get their own home, right? So in that case, they do get a siloed everything. Let's say they get their own washer and dryer, they have their own swimming pool, they have their own house that they're living within. Whereas your silver tier, your bronze tier folks, maybe they're living in a shared or communal apartment or complex where everything is more shared. So the pricing and packaging can play a role in this as well.
There's a question from the audience here too. Actually, I want to go back a little bit and somebody asked, like as an Amazon employee, they wanted to ask if they can create a SaaS solution that assists employee with works or problems at the warehouse using AWS AI agents. I think there's a little bit to unpack there, but do you want to tackle that first, and then there's another one?
Interesting. I don't see why not. I mean, we are constantly, as builders, encouraged to do exactly that, right? And most of the services that we're building internally at AWS or for big Amazon are essentially SaaS solutions themselves, right? Because there are multi-tenancy pieces that are involved with it, either teams of people or buildings of people. That we're building these solutions out for. And we need to be able to understand who's doing what and have that isolation and all those pieces. So absolutely, building internally a SaaS solution, and this goes for any organization, right? Not just within AWS, but any organization, they can absolutely build SaaS solutions that are just internal to them, that don't necessarily have pricing involved with it, but are built out for multiple teams within the organization.
Perfect. And then the other one, from your perspective today, which infrastructure have more benefits, single or multi-tenant?
Oh, well, single or multi-tenant. So are we talking about SaaS versus not SaaS here, or are we talking about the difference again? Coming back to vocabulary, right? Are we talking about pooled infrastructure versus siloed infrastructure? So I'll maybe kick that one back. Whoever asked that question, what do you think?
Cool. While that person responds, there's another one that just came saying with the SaaS
apocalypse, I think is what it is. SaaS apocalypse.
Wiping out $2 trillion in SaaS market cap. What's your advice to customers who invested in SaaS on AWS, multi-tenant architectures, control planes, etc.? Is it time to rethink?
No, I mean, and take this as this is just my opinion, right? So don't take this as financial advice. But no, in my opinion, no. Again, the market is always going to overreact. I mean, that's just what the market does, and there will be corrections, and there will be things will come back. Obviously, with the changes that were happening, with the amount of capex that's being spent into generative AI and into agentic AI and AI in general, there appears to be this sort of massive shift happening, but that shift is happening at a technological level. The fundamentals of these business models, I don't see changing. Right? The business model of SaaS, which in and of itself, that is, again, what SaaS is. It is a business model and a delivery model of software. It's not a technology. I just don't see that going away. There's always going to be subscriptions, right? There's always going to be pricing on a per quota basis, or get pricing on a credit basis, or more recently, the right pricing based on value or outcome basis. These are all portions or parts of how SaaS is priced and packaged, and then the delivery that goes behind it. I mean, even if we look at the largest AI companies that are out there, let's say OpenAI or Anthropic, they themselves, like John mentioned earlier, are operating as a SaaS model, right? They're either charging subscriptions or they're charging on an API basis. They have team capability for these services. They have enterprise agreements. It's a SaaS in and of itself, and these are the largest AI companies in the world. So no, I mean, in my opinion, this is a market overreaction that took place here. Now, that being said, individual SaaS companies that are actually producing SaaS products, some of them may be in trouble, to be honest, right? And that really comes down to how they're reacting to market forces and the change in the underlying software itself that they're providing to their customers. And the changes that are kind of being forced upon all of us, or others are adopting as far as AI is concerned. So we may see coming and going of individual SaaS providers and the software that they're producing, but SaaS as a business model, I just don't see going away.
I want to quote Jeff Bezos on this. It wouldn't be an AWS Twitch stream if we didn't. So he was a real fan of Benjamin Graham's philosophy. And in the short term, the stock market is a voting machine, meaning popularity or sentiment. And then in the long term, it's a weighing machine, really giving the fundamental value to what the thing is that's been traded for a while. And so ignoring the short-term stock price and thinking about the long-term weighing benefit, I think that the sell-off can always happen from anything. I think you're right on that. But the thing to pay attention to are those things which will not change. What will customers always want? And this is a very Amazonian question. It's how a bookstore got turned into the everything store. And really is, do customers always want lower prices? Do they want their products faster? Right? So think about those things within your own SaaS company, within your own product or service that the customers are always going to want. As everyone else is jumping onto a fad, think about what your customers are always going to want and provide that in the most customer-centric, service-oriented way, and you've got yourself a SaaS. Like, that's the SaaS whole business model. So Anthony, +1, 100% behind you on that one.
Let me ask you something, Anthony. Did John warn you when he invited you to this that we always have a controversial question on the show?
Well, no, not necessarily, but hey, bring it on. That's what we're here for, right?
Okay, I'll go easier on you. I'm not, but I'll tell you I
No.
am, just so you feel like I am.
That's all right.
So I think the one thing I want to ask, like typically when we talk about SaaS, people will say, the idea or the fundamental thing to do is you have one product, you have one version of what you're offering. You don't do necessarily one-off customizations, because otherwise that stops becoming a SaaS at some point. But with AI now, especially generative AI pushing in the opposite direction, we see tenants wanting the personalization on their instance, right? Like either based on what it depends obviously on the product and everything. So I want to ask you, like, and I see the market pushing in multiple directions, people defending one way, the other way. Like, I want to ask you, should I let them customize? Should I not? Like, or what's your take on this?
This is actually a fantastic question, and honestly, I don't think that there's a controversy here at all. But maybe that's just me, and how I'm looking at it, right? So, if we think about this from a fundamental level, and when we say something like the best practice is that there is one product, one solution, no customization, right? That's the best practice that we talk about in building a SaaS solution. Why are we saying that? Well, we're saying that because we don't want to be back in the same boat that we were in if we were transitioning from an installed product, right? An installed software solution where we're doing these customizations. It doesn't scale, right? The scaling is the real issue here. The more customizations that you put into a product, the more that you sell that product, the more staff that you have to have, the more resources that are needed to just maintain what you're doing there. You put a lot of effort into just keeping up with where you are, and your growth model starts to level out and then can ultimately collapse in the long run based on how many customers you have. What you want to be able to do is to scale infinitely. To be able to scale so that you can have as many customers as you can possibly attain, but not have to scale up in resources to support that, or at least not completely, right? I mean, there are certain levels here that come into play. But that's the reason why we actually say what we do as far as customization. Now, let's apply this to this AI question that's come up here. And this is a really, really good question. So we're talking about doing these AI refinements. Maybe it's RAG-based knowledge bases, retrieval augmented generation, right? Where you're doing a call, and as a part of that call, that request, that prompt that you're making to AI, it goes out and needs to retrieve domain-specific information about your organization, your product, your solution, whatever it may be, so that it's smart enough to answer those questions based on your particular domain. Or even more in depth than that, getting down and even fine-tuning models, right? So this is the process of taking an existing model and then adding your data specifically to it so that the model is smarter and is able to understand that domain information. Two different ways of solving kind of the same problem, right? Between RAG and fine-tuning. What are we doing here in this case? And what are we actually working on? We're working on customer data. So the question I would ask to you is, does a customer's data belong to them in a SaaS solution? And just because a customer puts a whole bunch of data into their whatever the solution may be, let's say it's a work workplace management or whatever it may happen to be, that data that you're putting in is not customizing the workplace management, right? Even though it is going to alter what people see, it's the customer's data. I kind of look at this in the same way when we're talking about this tenant refinement capability that happens with AI. This RAG data that's going in for domain specific information, these fine-tuned models that you're creating. As long as, and this is the caveat here, as long as the SaaS provider is producing the mechanisms, the guardrails for which this custom data, this RAG knowledge base, let's say, or this fine-tuned model is that the customer is providing you to use, as long as the SaaS provider is putting the rails in place of what is and is not accessible, is or is not available for them to do, and they're providing that same functionality universally across all of their tenants, where they're not having to write custom code for that and for that tenant that they're bringing in to do. I don't see that as breaking that rule, right, that we have of no customizations. Hope that kind of made sense. It was a bit of a long-winded answer.
Yeah, and this is fascinating to me because I know that these are leading edge, bleeding edge questions as SaaS providers start to add these generative features to their SaaS products and offerings, or as people get into SaaS for the first time with their generative products and offerings. And I'll say that there is a third rail whenever you're offering a SaaS offering, right? If you start customizing the software itself and you have a branch, a different code base per tenant, be careful, you're running an MSP, not a SaaS at this point, right?
Exactly.
It's totally
Absolutely
a valid software business model, but I wouldn't say it's SaaS. I think we're very strongly opinionated on that on the AWS side. Like once you breach that territory, you've gone down the MSP road perfectly fine, but it's not really SaaS. You're going to lose the benefits of SaaS that path.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And so I have another maybe even deeper level to this, because this is very bleeding edge stuff, and maybe I'll throw this question back to you, John, and your take on this too, because we have this new paradigm that's also coming out in regards to generative AI, where solutions are going to come out in the very near future and are already starting to hit the market that don't have a user experience built into them at all, right? They actually start out at an agentic AI basis, or they start out from a prompt basis with users interacting with an artificial intelligence solution and actually build out their own dashboards, their own interfaces, their own way of interacting with the data. But still utilizing, right, this SaaS product that is built underneath it to do that. So here's another level of this.
So do we have SaaSes that are made for the generative AIs? Like, is it a SaaS for a human, or is it a SaaS for the generative AIs at that point? Right?
Yeah. And I would say that it's still SaaS, right? Because again, you're the company that's producing the solution is not building this end interface that the user sees. The user is interacting with the guardrails and the product that has been built for them to build the interface for themselves. It's not maintained at the SaaS provider. The SaaS provider is just providing the tooling to do so. So another little interesting hiccup there.
Anthony, I want to go to we've got such great questions and interaction with our commenting community today. So at EDI-Cloud says, are we shifting to outcome-based pricing over seats for builders, or does the architecture change too? Or is it just a pricing shift? So where are we leaning on well-architected for the SaaS lens in regard to this question?
Yeah, right now it is we are flying the plane while trying to build it, is how I'm going to answer this question. Because I don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold for this, other than the fact that all of these pricing models that we're talking about, whether it's outcome based, whether it's per seat, whether it's subscription, whatever it is, these are all still actively being used, or in the case of outcome based is really just starting to take hold. But if we take that step back again and we think from the perspective of your customer, of the SaaS provider's customer, what do they want at the end of the day? They want outcomes, right? They're interested in getting out of that solution the problem that they're trying to solve at that
Right.
particular point in time. So, do I see us moving in the direction of outcome-based pricing? I do. Is that easy? No, it's really, really not. Because if you think it's difficult today to create observability, which is another key point of creating a well created, well architected SaaS, is to have good observability and the metrics around it. If you think that's important and difficult to do today at a tenant basis, just wait till we're at the point where we're trying to do this for outcome-based pricing. Because what is a successful outcome? That is inevitably the question that's going to be asked. And is your answer as far as an outcome from the producer's perspective, the SaaS creator's perspective, the same as what your customers think that outcome happens to be? How do you measure that, right? So there's just a lot of questions that are coming up with that. I think in the long run, that is the future, moving in that direction. But the other models, I don't see necessarily going away either.
So there are two pieces that I end up having this conversation with customers over and over and over about, pricing and costing, and what does my SaaS cost me? Like, what are my COGS, my cost of goods
Right.
sold, right? If it were a lemonade stand, I'm going to mix lemons and water and sugar and end up with lemonade, and that raw material turns into my my thing that I'm serving. Same thing on a SaaS. You're mixing up Lambda and EC2 and DynamoDB and your Kubernetes environment and your network output to like make a service for your customers, and that's your COGS on that side, right?
Right.
That's going to be an interesting equation when you start to add in the AI components and the outcomes that customers want, and what are the different tiers of the different things
Sure.
that you provide, especially those expensive things, but those things that add real differentiated value for people. And then on the other side, what's the thing that you charge? And so it's always customer expectation. It comes down to what the
Yes.
customer expects. And so there may be a noisy marketplace full of people charging customers for this same service in a different mode. And you have to go do your research and figure out what other people are charging and why, and what would actually make sense to your customer. But at the end of the day, if I turn on the spigot at the back of my house and I get a gallon of water out, I want to pay for the gallon of water. Like, that's the service I got. Most of these things that are outcome based are just going to be more common sense to more people. And it'll allow you to scale all the way down to the smallest customer, like the 1 unit of use.
Easiest to understand, right? Right.
Yeah, easy to just really get, as a customer, and then scale all the way up to the customer who's going to keep using more and more and more, because it's unit of use, it's unit of value, it's the unit that you get charged for, and then that outcome based that you call it. I think that makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases, but as an architect, I have to answer, it depends. But those are the general
Right.
ways that I think about it, right? So that's how I go
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah. And if you're feeling this pain when it comes to pricing and packaging, just know you are not alone. That is the number one question that we get on the
Mhm.
business side of building SaaS, is how do we price and package this? And it is a very difficult answer, right? We can't just say, hey, do it this way, because there are so many factors that come into it.
So I think this one is a good segue onto our next topic here. Thanks for enduring the controversy, Anthony. So, like, we can breathe a sigh of relief here, and I think we got
I
this
didn't I
comment.
didn't think it was controversial, so it's okay.
Oh, it is. It can be a good cocktail topic if you get into it with folks on the side. I love that one. With
Nice.
the design of the system, and we had this comment in the our question in the comments, and I wanted to wait till we got to this one because I know it was coming up. So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, we're building a SaaS product on AWS," thinking about the tech side now, we talked about what SaaS is and isn't, and the business, real business model behind it, but what are some of the first architectural decisions that you walk them through, and what's your mental model? What's your decision tree? How do you get there?
Sure. And I know this is questions specifically about architecture and tech, so I'm going to skip over
Yep.
this really quickly, but I'm going to just say it one more time. C number one, this is a business model first. You have to answer the business questions before you can get in and start answering these architectural questions. So that is first and foremost. But that said, let's say that you've made it past that. What do we need to think about first? The first thing that we need to talk about is identity and onboarding. Why identity and onboarding, and what does that even mean? So identity, you're thinking, okay, well, users. I mean, we know about users. We know about authentication. Yes, that's one part of it, but it's only one side of identity when it comes to a SaaS solution, because a user, let's call them user number one here, is not operating independently in this case. They're operating as part of one of your tenants, right? They are a family that lives in, or if it's a family that lives in the apartment building, it's one of the people that's a part of that family. So when a user in a SaaS solution goes through and utilizes that system, we need to understand not only who the authenticated user is and what that authenticated user has access to for the software, but also what tenant that user is a part of, because that tenant has boundaries that need to be separated from it, tenant A, from tenant B, from every other tenant in the solution. That identity is the combination of the user identity and the tenant identity, and it becomes something that we like to call the tenant context, the contextual information about the user and the tenant that flows through the entire system. You need to understand that at a fundamental level, and your entire solution needs to be built around that tenant context so that you can properly apply the tenant isolation, the data isolation, the correct features for the correct tenant. All of those things are all built on that core foundation. Now, that ties in directly with onboarding. So once you've identified, okay, I understand what tenant identity, or what the identity is, quote unquote, in general for SaaS, that is user plus tenant. Now we need to be able to get new tenants into our solution, right? So that onboarding process is fundamental as well, and it goes to what we like to call the journey map, the customer journey map that happens for a customer that is coming into your solution.
Everyone else that's out there, like that SaaS journey white paper, it is a must read. So if you are on the SaaS journey, if you are trying to turn your business into a SaaS, if you already are a SaaS and you've not consumed this white paper, Run, Don't Walk, download it. It's from the AWS documentation. It is the SaaS journey. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to hand that off.
No, it's great
to the listeners.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So that journey that your customer needs to take from the time that they purchase your software to the time that they're able to actually start using your software, and then within the software actually utilizing it, it starts with onboarding. Onboarding is that first touch. Remember when John was talking about the restaurant analogy, right? The service part of this that comes along with it. Well, the onboarding process is generally the first touch that your customer is going to have with the actual service that your software as a service is delivering, getting them onboarded in a way that is quick, fast, and efficient. So with the identity in hand, we now want to make sure that the onboarding is as fully automated as absolutely humanly possible, that it is repeatable, and that it is frictionless. This leads to a measurement that we like to do, and we encourage our customers to track when they're building a SaaS solution, called time to value. Time to value is the time from the signing of the contract, the putting in your credit card, whatever it is, to the point where the first user of your organization or your customer that's coming in gets actual value out of your solution. The shorter the amount of time that time to value is, the more sticky that customer will be. We have seen this data over and over and over again. Studies have been done on this. Time to value is absolutely key in keeping stickiness with a customer, because the value, again, getting back to outcome-based pricing, that's what the customer wants. All the shiny, all the fancy, everything else is fluff, right? It's not to say it's not important, but it is fluff compared to the value, the outcome that a customer is looking for. So identity first, onboarding second, or is a direct correlation with that. Those would be the first things that I would immediately tackle. Once you get past that, then starting to think about what's your data partitioning strategy going to look like? What's your compute isolation strategy, right? Starting to get into those architectural discussions about what are we going to make pooled? What are we going to make siloed? Where are we going to have bridge capability? What is our tiering and pricing? How does that influence all of that? Because all it needs, again, the business needs to feed into this. Then starting to talk about metrics. Yes, I'm going to bring up observability here. Why am I saying this? Because most companies wait to the very
Because
end
Anthony's
to do
passionate
this.
about observability. Yeah. Yep.
Once most companies wait to the very end to start talking about metrics and observability, and then it is massive amount of technical debt to get what you what you want out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we could go into a whole conversation just about observability, but metrics and then operations and deployment or DevOps. Yeah, that's how I would look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, that customer lifetime value, the customer retention costs, all of those components, you don't really get to answer those business questions about your tenants, about your business, unless you start having those observability components that are baked in. And in
Absolutely.
order to even understand those, that identity that knows like which tenant goes with which user, which is that SaaS identity. It's the user ID plus the tenant ID, sandwich those together, you get your SaaS identity. And being able to flow those through your system, have that hit your logging in AWS CloudWatch logs, those show up, you're able to go slice and dice data based on that tenant identity. Then you're really swimming in the kind of information that everyone wishes they had about their users.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things SaaS gets that you just get. It just comes along for the ride. You know who's having a good day, who's having a bad day, which tenant is using too much of your service and maybe they're going to cause a noisy neighbor problem, or which one of your tenants really is not utilizing the features that you think are actually going to bring them value. And then you can go market directly to that customer and let them know. Maybe you have to put some enablement out there. Maybe it's your sales team needs to go white glove something, but you get to know things about your customer and spend the time to make sure that they stay with you, that you're providing real value to your customers. Yeah, I love the
John, I
observability
gotta,
comment.
you know,
Yeah,
you know what's coming, right?
go for it. Yeah, final round.
We're coming
Yeah,
towards close to the end of the program. I gotta ask the final question here.
go for it.
Anthony, just to take us to a clean close, if
Sure.
future looking, if you could give builders out there, people watching us or watching later, the recording, advice for like either starting or improving their SaaS, their SaaS architecture on
Sure.
AWS, what would be that advice?
Yeah, so I think maybe we have maybe three things that I would say. First, business, business, business. Business comes first. I'm an engineer. I get it, right? I want to engineer and design and build cool things too. I want to design architecture. That's what we do. But business really has to come first because it's going to be the driver for what you're building and why you're building it, right? So start with that. Secondly, get that vocabulary straight. As we talked about at the very beginning, make sure that everyone in the organization is on board with that they understand what it is exactly that you're building. And the fact that everyone in the organization, especially if you're coming from a traditional product background, is going to have to change to a certain level. There is a fundamental transformation that will be taking place. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, I would say, focus on the control plane, that single pane of glass that you can look through to manage and monitor your entire solution. And to make sure that you're building that out, not only just from an operational perspective of getting, tenants in and out and understanding what they're doing, but also to provide appropriate information to all areas of your organization. Make that data democratized to all of the areas of the organization, to sales, to marketing, to finance. Going back to the observability question, make sure that they all have input as far as what they want to see output from the solution. You can't measure what you haven't put metrics on. So, make sure and get that information. And then I guess that kind of actually leads into the third thing, which is really just observability, 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 which John I think kind of put a bow on here a moment ago. But make sure also though that again that when you're doing this, that it's not just the engineering team that's thinking that you know what needs to be observed here, because it's not just about running the solution. It's about getting the right data to the right people in the organization to grow, right? Growth is the key thing with SaaS that you want to accomplish, and you need their input. So create a cross-functional team from all of these different areas, have them all give you input so that you're measuring and monitoring correctly. Yeah, I think that would be my 3.
Thanks, Anthony. I just want to appreciate the audience here for bringing such engaging conversations, really bringing the heat for us to be able to have an engaging set of questions and answers. I want to thank Anthony for coming on and providing his expertise. And so much of this is evergreen. So as you're taking your SaaS journey, whether you've got you're a member in a large SaaS or based organization, or you're just taking your first steps and you're developing something green, or if you're taking these brand new concepts that we were talking about with taking generative AI plus SaaS and really trying to figure out what that is, we believe that we've got some of the best breadth and depth out there in order to be able to tackle this problem with SaaS. I just really want to say thank you to everyone. Raphael, my co-host with the most, and we'll see you next time on the AWS Pulse. Really appreciate y'all. Have a wonderful evening.